She awoke to the sound of breathing that wasn't her own. Heavy, ragged, wet. Sergeant Isla Vance blinked against the searing white light above her, its clinical glare haloed in dust and smoke. Her mouth was dry as bone, and her head throbbed with the telltale pulse of a concussion. A high-pitched whine clung to the edges of her hearing, like a scream that wouldn't finish. She tried to move, and the chains reminded her she was no longer a soldier of Earth. Not officially. Her arms were stretched overhead, wrists caught in grab binders that pulsed with a dull red glow. They sapped strength. She'd seen similar tech on battlefield prisoners, but those were temporary restraints. This was permanent, institutional. It hummed with the arrogant energy of a civilization that had perfected captivity. A voice, raspy and unfamiliar, hissed in the dark. Human? You alive? She turned her head with effort. The speaker had no mouth she could see, just ridged plates of chitin and two eyes like frozen oil. Its limbs were bound like hers, its carapace dull and cracked in places, as if worn from years of restraint. There was no fear in its tone, just weariness. Maybe curiosity. Unfortunately, Isla muttered. Her tongue scraped her cracked lip as she tested her body. Bruised, ribs maybe cracked, but nothing felt detached or punctured. She could work with this. Pain was familiar, predictable. The cell smelled like sweat, bile, and scorched metal. It was round, ceilingless, and deep underground, judging by the pressure in her sinuses and the way the air sat heavy on her chest. Biosynthetics clung to the walls like mold, faintly pulsing with life, and an oily mist hovered near the floor vents. Somewhere far above, a roar echoed down through stone and steel. Not thunder. Applause. The Kavar Dominion didn't hide their cruelty. They televised it. The alien beside her shifted, chains rattling. They say your kind bleeds loud. Screams good for the cameras. That you fight harder when you're losing. We do more than that, Isla said, flexing her fingers against the cold floor. Her skin stuck to it in places where the wounds had begun to clot. We make sure losing hurts. The alien made a low clicking sound. Laughter, maybe. Or pity. I watched the Vortari scream when the First World fell. Saw the Alunan die with silence when they took their seas. But your kind? Your kind killed a Kavar with a mining tool. It went to death during transport. What kind of species does that? Isla chuckled dryly. The kind that loses everything, then decides it's not enough. She let her head rest against the stone for a breath. Memories filtered in, flash fire in orbit, her unit ambushed above a contested moon, the black and gold sigils of Kavar dropships descending like locusts. Her squad's last stand in the ruins of Station Argent, fighting with blades and fists when the ammo ran dry. And then, gas, pain, blackout. And Mason, his hand still on her shoulder as the sedative took them both. His voice a whisper. You live. You tell them what we did here. She hadn't known if she'd wake again. Now she wished she hadn't. Footsteps. Metallic. Measured. Then the hiss of a gravity lock as the door irised open. The guard was Kavar, 7 feet tall, plated in obsidian armor with a face like sculpted death. Its eyes were narrow slits of luminous gold. Its armor bore the sigils of the arena lords, etched in ceremonial spirals of molten gold and dark crimson. It tossed something at Isla's feet with a motion too casual for what followed. A collar. Shimmering with an active shock circuit, tiny spikes along the interior rim glinting in the dim light. You fight today, the Kavar said in perfect Anglic. Not because it had to. Because it wanted her to understand every word. General Threx has issued the ultimatum. Your kind will entertain, or your kind will end. The words were spoken with the finality of law. Not just a show. This was judgment. The alien beside her hissed softly. They did the same to my people. The first fight was a message. Now we serve drinks in our own cities. The collar pulsed. A warning beep. The door slammed shut with a hiss and magnetic thud, leaving behind silence and the faint scent of ionized air. The alien beside her murmured, You have until the lift comes. Then you belong to the crucible. Not yet, Isla said. She reached forward with shaking hands and lifted the collar. It was heavier than it looked. Like a declaration. The lift that brought her to the arena floor was designed to disorient. Fast, smooth, and bathed in dissonant tones of ultraviolet lighting that made human eyes sting. It rose through layers of sound, first the mechanical grind of subterranean pistons, then the rising thunder of a crowd. By the time the platform breached the surface, Isla was already blinking against a hurricane of noise. The arena was not built for mercy. It was an ocean of alien life stacked in vertical terraces, each level swathed in glowing advertisements, language glyphs, and biometric feats. A coliseum that stretched into the clouds, crowned by hovering drones that recorded every heartbeat and twitch. Some species wore glimmering veils. Others bared weapons and teeth. Most had never seen a human before, not truly. They leaned forward to stare. The upper levels were for the Kavar elite, bodies draped in flowing cloaks, sipping from bone-colored flasks. The lower pits held servants and off-worlders, a blur of species Isla didn't recognize. She spotted one human. A boy. Shackled. Eyes hollow. Forced to clap by a shock baton. Holograms shimmered above the crowd, replaying old kills, slow-motion executions, and the favorite deaths of champions long gone. Isla's face now flickered across those holos, grainy and grain-fed, tagged with odds she couldn't read. The sand beneath her boots was blood-soaked. Not metaphorically. It was pink and red and violet and green. Some of it bubbled. Her collar clicked tight. A voice boomed through the arena, translated into Anglic by 1,000 speaker nodes hidden in the structure. Subject, Isla Vance. Rank, human. First of her species to enter the crucible. Let the blood remember. A ripple of murmurs. One alien clicked its mandibles, laughing. Another spat into the dust. Isla held a weapon that barely qualified as a machete, a curved, unbalanced thing likely designed more for flash than function. The edge glowed faintly with a plasma coating. She turned it once in her hand. Sloppy, but it would cut. Across from her, the gates opened with a sound like a beast exhaling its last breath. Out walked something massive. It was all teeth and limbs, 9 feet tall and quadrupedal, its flesh covered in crystalline plates that shimmered like oil-slick glass. Its handler, a Kavar with robes instead of armor, gestured to it with a needle rod. The beast sniffed the air. Locked on her. The crowd roared. Bets lit up across the holos. Pulse rates, injury odds, kill projections. Isla was given 30 seconds to live by most. One of the announcers laughed in Kavarian, the language a wet rattle of throat clicks and snarls, but a translated voice cut through. And now, the first human specimen enters the crucible. Will she scream like the rest? Or will she teach us something new? Isla spat blood into the dust. Her lip had split open again. A mosquito bite compared to what she'd already endured. She stared at the creature, then up into the arena walls where she knew Threx would be watching. Somewhere in a high booth, surrounded by sycophants and executioners. Judging. She didn't scream. She grinned. The chains weren't gone, but they were about to become weapons. She whispered to herself, the words too low for the crowd to hear. Let's show them what losing really looks like. And she charged. The beast didn't roar. It didn't need to. It moved, and the crowd roared for it. It came in low and fast, limbs clawing sand and wet, clicking strides. Each step was too fluid for something that size. The crystalline plates along its back shifted with a scraping hiss, shedding flecks of light like it was dusting off stars. Its mouth wasn't a mouth at all, just a pulsing maw of heat vents that opened and closed in a regular rhythm, breathing in the air, tasting her. Its eyes, 3 sets, ringed with pale blue bone, never blinked. Isla sidestepped, the movement raw and ungraceful. She barely avoided the first lunge. The beast's claw tore through the air, missed her by inches, and gouged a trench through the arena floor deep enough to bury a man. The crowd held. Kavarians, slavers, off-world merchants, mercenaries, spectators from distant empires, predators all salivating for spectacle. Isla caught a glimpse of a 6-eyed Tervasi noble dripping in psychic silk, clutching a crystalline betting orb. Another wore a cloak made from the scalps of 100 species. They didn't see combat. They saw currency. To them, she was nothing but a gamble. A data blip. A statistic. Her legs screamed with the effort. Her boots skidded, but she managed to twist her weight, rolling behind a collapsed stone pillar near the arena wall. The weapon in her hand vibrated faintly, its plasma edge whining from instability. Cut deep, she whispered. Cut once. Then move. The creature lunged again. This time, Isla ran toward it. The thing blinked, thrown off, not used to prey closing the distance. Its handler shouted something in a dialect that didn't translate, the needle rod in its grip flaring red. Isla ducked under its chest, slashing upward with the machete. It bit deep into jointed flesh. Steam hissed out, followed by black ichor that smelled of sulfur and melting copper. The creature shrieked, a jagged, high-frequency sound that made her knees wobble, and it kicked sideways. The blow sent her sprawling. Pain exploded through her side. Something cracked in her ribs. She hit the ground hard, skidding through the grit. Her weapon spun away. The crowd jeered. Some cheered. Some laughed. A Kavar child banged its claws on the barrier glass, chanting something rhythmic in a dialect Isla couldn't parse. She heard someone yell a word that translated roughly to meat. She coughed blood. The beast circled, bleeding now, favoring its wounded limb, but still breathing easy. A tremor rippled along its back, light pulsing between the crystal plates in a pattern. A signal. Intelligent. Linked to something. Maybe someone. Its handler raised the needle rod again, trying to goad it into finishing the kill. Isla didn't rise. She rolled onto her side slowly, eyes on the weapon half buried in the sand. 5 meters away. Maybe less. No way to reach it fast. She turned toward the arena wall, toward the crowd, and found the boy. He was still there, the shackled human. Young. 12, maybe 13. Pale. Starved. His eyes met hers. For a second, the arena vanished. She didn't mouth words. She just nodded. Once. The boy moved. With hands chained together, he slammed his body against the perimeter barrier's power coupler hard. The barrier shorted for a flicker. Not much. But the pulse glitched the collar on Isla's neck. It fizzed. Released. She was free. The handler shouted. The beast reacted too slowly. Isla surged forward, sand spraying behind her. She didn't grab the weapon. She dove past it, grabbed the splintered bone from a fallen gladiator corpse nearby, and jammed it straight into the beast's mouth as it reared back. Bone cracked. The creature tried to scream, but the sound choked out into a whimpering rasp. She leapt up its side like a ladder, using the wounded limb as a foothold. She didn't scream. She stabbed. The machete came next, recovered, reversed in grip, plunged into the back of the beast's skull until the plasma hiss gave way to silence. The crowd fell into stunned quiet. Then came the chaos. Not cheering. Fear. She stood atop the corpse, drenched in black ichor, breathing hard, blood dripping down her brow. The arena sand steamed beneath her, the creature's corpse twitching in its death throes. Her body ached, ribs possibly broken, skin cut and bruised, but she stood tall. She turned her head toward the high booth, toward Threx. She raised the machete, not high, not as a cheer. She pointed it at him. A message. A promise. You're next. And every screen in the arena captured it. Hovercams zoomed in on her bloodstained face, broadcasting across hundreds of worlds. In the viewing towers orbiting above, Kavar nobles whispered behind jeweled masks. In the lower pit bars of conquered moons, enslaved species stared at flickering hollow feeds, and for the first time in years, something like hope broke through the static. Below the arena, in shadowed cells and infirmary alcoves, prisoners began to murmur. One old Scythri began carving a mark into the wall. Another knelt in silent reverence. The boy who broke the circuit didn't smile, but he sat taller. Far above, in the command booth of the Crucible, General Threx leaned forward, talons tapping the carved armrest of his throne. The room smelled of incense and old war oil. Tapestries of conquered systems lined the walls, each bearing a stitched sigil of a fallen species. Earth's mark had already been prepared, waiting for confirmation. Threx's victory, in his mind, was inevitable. Spectacle merely made it poetic. He said nothing for several long moments. A smaller Kavar beside him, a tactician, scaled in ceremonial bronze, whispered, "Do we cut the feed?" "No," Threx said, eyes fixed on the monitor. "Let it run. Let every system see. She's igniting unrest. There are reports from the slave tiers, rioting in the viewing barracks. Let it burn a little. It gives us license to burn back." He smiled, revealing rows of serrated teeth. "And then we remind them why their stars now belong to us." Back in the cells, Isla was dragged through blood and oil, half conscious, wrists bound again but collarless now. They didn't take her to a medical chamber. They took her to the Hall of Names, where they displayed the helmets and skulls of every fallen fighter. Some were bleached. Some were metal cast. Some were left to rot, still attached to shredded armor. A guard shoved her down before a new pedestal. Empty. Waiting. "They prepare your place," the guard said. "Win or lose, human. You join them." Isla stared at the empty stand. She blinked. For a moment, the hallway blurred. She saw her old squad's faces flicker through her mind. Mason, Aru, Tegan. Laughing. Dying. Tegan's last joke echoing under gunfire. Mason's last breath in her arms. She didn't cry. She bled. She remembered. "I won't need a pedestal," she whispered. "I'll need a bonfire." And behind her, deep in the shadowed cells, other prisoners had heard her fight. Some stirred. Some murmured. Someone scratched her name into the wall. The first spark had landed, and blood had made fire. In the darkness of her cell, after the guards left, Isla slumped against the cold wall. Pain radiated through her chest. Her breath came ragged, but she kept her eyes open. Across the chamber, a new prisoner was being dragged in. A Talaxi brute with singed fur and half a tusk gone. He looked at her with a sneer until he noticed the ichor staining her skin, the weapon at her side. Then he gave her space, and she, for the first time since Argent, closed her eyes. Not to sleep, to remember, and to plan. They thought the arena was hers. They were wrong. It would be theirs. She would turn it into a graveyard with lights. Let the galaxy watch. The days that followed were measured in bruises, beatings, and silence. Isla woke to pain and slept to pain, though sleep was too generous a word. The Kavar did not allow rest so much as shut down. Her body burned from the fight, ribs broken, skin peeled raw where the sand and ichor had fused during the kill. She didn't get a medic. She got a bucket of recycled ice and a single protein slab. But she was still alive. And in the Dominion, that meant she still had a role to play. The guards dragged her to the training yards on the third morning. The pit was smaller than the arena, ringed in low-plasma fencing and lined with cameras disguised as stone eyes. There were no cheers here, only cold, calculating silence. Overseers stood on platforms above, watching every move, tracking form, blood loss, bone fractures. The sand here was grayer, older, soaked with failures. Training was mandatory. Survival was optional. She wasn't alone. At least 40 others stood in the pit. Not just humans, though she counted 3 more now. A woman with tattoos that looked Terran, a short man missing a hand, and a boy she recognized immediately, the one who had shorted the collar. He looked at her without expression, his eyes sunken but sharp. A survivor's look. Elsewhere, there were aliens she hadn't seen before. One looked like a walking slab of muscle with 6 elbows. Another had skin that shimmered like water in sunlight. A thin-limbed creature with no face crouched motionless beside the fence, tendrils twitching in rhythm with some alien heartbeat. A few wore training collars. Most bore lashes. One bore a burn mark shaped like the Kavar imperial seal, etched into its skull. Another, a feathered, bird-like creature with silver talons, never blinked, its gaze fixed on Isla throughout. The Kavar training master entered last. He was unarmored, which made it worse. All sinew and scar tissue, gold ceremonial chain running from his left wrist to a barbed spine piercing on his back. His skin had that iridescent luster of veteran Kavar warriors, those who had taken 50 lives or more in sanctioned combat. The chain marked him as a blood judge. Among Kavar doctrine, blood judges were considered holy executioners, masters of martial purity, chosen to shape violence into an art. They did not speak often. When they did, it was considered law. His voice, when it came, was guttural and direct. You will learn to kill beautifully, or you will die poorly. He tossed down weapons. Clubs, blades, bones. No duplicates, no balance, no names. Isla reached for a short axe made of dark alloy. Heavy, crude, but solid. The boy didn't reach for anything. He just watched her. The training began with an immediate order. Pair off. Fight. And just like that, the killing began again. Isla didn't fight to win. She fought to learn. The Talaxi who lunged at her was all strength and no grace. She let him get close. Too close. Let him swing twice, both wild. Then she planted her foot in the soft part of his thigh, twisted the axe against his kneecap, and drove her elbow into his jaw. He fell. She didn't finish him. The trainer did. A sharp flick of a rod, red arc, sizzle, a scream. Do not shame your victory with mercy, the trainer hissed. Isla stared at the Talaxi's corpse. You want a show? I want a war. The Kavar didn't respond, but his eyes narrowed. She was marked. 3 more days passed. Each day, the same rhythm. Wake, train, hurt, bleed, collapse. She found the tattooed woman's name was Lieutenant Farah Ibekwe, South African, Marine, presumed Kia over the Phobos line. Farah had been here a month longer. She taught Isla which guards looked away during beatings, which med drips to steal from, and which walls were thin enough to eavesdrop through. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd already buried her fear. The boy's name was Kieran. He spoke only twice. Once, to tell her he wasn't sorry. The other, to ask her if humans always bled that much. Yes, Isla told him. And we get meaner after. Each night, after training, the prisoners were locked in reinforced cages built from fused metal scavenged from broken ships. The Kavar called the block the womb, a sick joke. No birth happened here, only reshaping. Some prisoners sharpened scraps. Others whispered stories in the dark. One alien, a Scytheri named Veluan, drew old constellations in the dust with a broken claw, murmuring, "We used to think stars were gods. Now they are prisons." One night, the bird-like creature bowed its head to Isla as she limped past. No words, just a slow, precise motion, a gesture of recognition. On the seventh day, they were summoned again, this time to a broadcast pit. Smaller, closer, intimate. No crowd, just hollow drones. "Test footage," one of the guards said. Before the next games, the Kavar trainer stepped forward and gestured. "You, and you." He pointed to Isla. And to Farah. Isla's mouth dried. Farah stepped forward without a word. Her jaw was set, her expression unreadable. They both stood in the sand. The weapons were thrown again. A rusted blade, a sharpened length of bone. "Begin." The two women circled each other. They didn't speak, didn't blink. The blades they held were mismatched. Isla's longer, curved, better reach. Farah's short, jagged, better close quarters. They moved at the same time. Blades met. Sparks flew. Then fists. Then knees. The drones buzzed in closer. Isla felt the hum of energy off the camera nodes. This wasn't training. It was a test. For both of them. And for whoever was watching. They traded blows. Isla's ribs screamed. Farah's arm bled from a slash. But they held back, testing range, gauging power, not killing. They were reading each other. Two predators with too much in common. It wasn't enough. A drone's light pulsed. A voice crackled over the pit's comms. Not the trainer. "Threx. One must fall." Isla froze. Farah didn't. She surged forward. Not with rage. With resolve. The strike aimed low. Isla countered, knocked the blade aside, but not all of it. A cut opened on her thigh. They locked eyes. Farah whispered, "Make it count," and lunged again. Isla had no choice. The counter came from instinct, not hate. Her blade drove into Farah's side. The other woman gasped, sagged, and smiled. She fell, dead before she hit the sand. The drones hovered, capturing every second. The trainer nodded once. "Worthy." Isla dropped the blade. She turned to the camera. "This isn't a show. This is a warning." Then she walked out alone, eyes forward, fire in her lungs. That night, Isla didn't sleep. She lay in the dark, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, remembering the sound Farah made when she fell. Not pain, not fear, something like peace, like purpose. She whispered her name to the dark. Farah Ibekwe. She wouldn't be forgotten. Kieran sat across from her, eyes watching. "Did you hate her?" he asked. "No," Isla said, "but I respected her enough to finish it." Silence again. Then Kieran nodded. She'd do the same. Later that night, Isla found the bone blade under her bunk. Someone had left it there. A quiet offering. Not to honor her victory. To honor her choice. She stared at it for a long time. Her hand didn't shake. Pain teaches. But now it was her turn. She was going to teach the Kavar what it meant to build fire from ash. What it meant to wake a monster and give it purpose. And she was just getting started. The Kavar called it the Crucible Parade. A ritual showcase before the opening of the Grand Cycle. A week-long string of blood duels, warhorde exhibitions, team battles, and public executions. Every system under Dominion control broadcasted. Not as punishment. As propaganda. The parade wasn't just for the crowd. It was for the galaxy. And this year, Isla marched in it. She was unchained. Not free, never that. But no collar. No handler. Just the heavy silence of 40 warriors, criminals, and survivors walking the spiral path through the inner citadel of Varniker. The streets were carved from obsidian and set with bloodlines, thin rivulets of living bioluminescent fluid from extinct species, pulsing with pale light beneath armored boots. The route wound past shrines, gutted statues, and iron spikes adorned with the skulls of those who tried to run. Every monument whispered the same truth. Obedience is survival. Defiance is art. The parade moved past tiers of Kavar citizens lining the walkways above. They stared down with teeth-baring grins, their children tossing shards of glass shaped like bones. Some wore masks carved from the faces of conquered species, ceremonial and grotesque. Most of the aliens in the lineup had accepted the silence. Heads bowed. Weapons slack. Hollow stares toward the sky. Isla hadn't. She walked with her chin up, eyes forward. Her weapon, a short, wide-bladed sword nicknamed a Wrath Fong by the guards, hung from her side like a sentence. The Kavar loved giving names to death. It made it easier to catalog. She caught glimpses of other prisoners in the line. Kieran, pale and small but walking like he meant it. Velu in the Scythery, fingers twitching as if mapping invisible stars. The feathered alien, whose silver eyes never stopped watching her. Behind them, the faceless one drifted in an anti-grav shroud, silent and unreadable. Somewhere in the crowd, a chant began. Human. Human. It wasn't praise. It was a warning. Others joined in. Not in fear, but mockery. As if saying, here is the anomaly. The exception. The next to die. She ignored it. Above the square, a balcony of black stone extended over the path. On it stood Threx. He wore no armor today, only ceremonial robes and the sash of a warlord general, a flowing red band marked with the burn glyphs of systems conquered under his command. One of the symbols was new. Earth. It was still fresh. The edges hadn't yet faded into the fabric. He raised his clawed hand. The parade halted. A low note echoed across the plaza, bass-heavy, vibrating through stone and flesh alike. The horn of the arena lords. A platform rose from the ground, hydraulic growls slicing the air. Atop it, a bound alien, a Delcari priest from a world that once rivaled the Kavar in spiritual unity. Its 6 arms were lashed behind it, its head forced downward by a torque clamp that hissed and sputtered with each breath. The priest wore the tattered remnants of ceremonial blue-gold cloth. Symbols of peace, now shredded. But its eyes burned bright. As the crowd quieted, the priest began to hum, not a scream, not a plea. A deep resonant vibration that resonated across the silence like an ancient lullaby. A death chant. Isla had heard recordings of them in off-world intelligence briefings. It was a Delcari rite, meant to remind the living to stay righteous in the face of oblivion. Threx interrupted. Entertainment, he called, voice amplified by the crystal nodes embedded in his ribs. The word echoed across the city, picked up by every node, every monitor, every hollow-eyed drone circling the crowd. The Delcari was lowered into the pit. The chant was still rising as the gates of the crucible opened with a shriek of ancient machinery. The first match of the blood cycle was beginning, and Isla's name was called second. The chamber behind the arena was cold and humming with power. Drones buzzed overhead like flies, their lenses dilated wide to capture every twitch. A hologram flickered to life before her, displaying her stats: height, weight, kill ratio, combat rating. Someone had entered a nickname into the broadcast system. The Blade of Ash. She didn't react. Kieran stood nearby, watching the gate. He didn't speak at first, just handed her a strip of cloth, a piece of Farah's old uniform. It had been torn and hidden, passed hand to hand like contraband. It's real, he said. Not a copy. Not a trick. She took it, tied it around her wrist. Today? He asked. She nodded. Today. They'll bring a champion. Or worse. Let them. The other prisoners watched silently. The Scythery nodded once. Even the bird-like one tilted its head in a gesture Isla had come to recognize. Respect. They're scared of you now, Kieran said. Good, she said. The gate opened, and the fire began again. The crucible roared to life. Columns of plasma fire licked the sky. The audience tears trembled with stamping feet, claws, hoofs. Some alien spectators plugged cables into their skulls to feed directly on neural euphoria. The sensory thrill of combat pumped straight into their brains. Above them, drones projected Isla's face, her past fights, her stance in real time. Specimen, Isla Vance. Alias, the Blade of Ash. Combat rating, 89.3. Last kill, Delphax Berserker. Style, adaptive. Psychological profile, unstable, creative. Across from her, the far gate opened. Out stepped a Kavar champion. Bigger than most. Wearing bone armor fused with energy plates, sigils of personal victory glowing like molten scars. His face was untouched by helmet. He wanted her to see him. Isla didn't blink. Begin. The arena floor changed beneath them, shifting plates rose, revealing jagged terrain. Obstacle columns. Scorch zones. The Kavar called these variables mood breakers. The champion lunged, blades already activated, 2 curved sabers dripping with a plasma edge. Isla ducked under the first strike, rolled, used the terrain to slide beneath an outcrop, then came up with her wrath fong angled for a counter. Clang. Sparks. Dust. Blood. The first hit was hers. Not fatal, but enough to make him bleed. The crowd went silent. Then the cheers came. Not out of joy. Out of hunger. The fight became a dance. Isla didn't overpower, she dismantled. Cut the champion's speed. Used his momentum against him. Cut courts. Baited swings. Sliced shallow, never deep. Let the pain mount. But halfway through, he scored a strike. Fast. Clean. Right across her ribs. The burn jolted her. Nearly took her off her stance. Her breath caught. For 3 seconds, she faltered. Blood ran hot. And then she adapted. She dragged the wound across a heat vent, cauterizing it mid-combat. Roared. Came back harder. The final strike was a downward plunge through his clavicle. The Kavar choked. Fell. She stood over him, sword glistening with blood that steamed in the heat. She looked to the audience. Raised the blade. Then dropped it. Walked away. The arena didn't cheer. It watched. Because they weren't looking at a victim anymore. They were looking at something dangerous. Something human. And the grand cycle had just begun. Back in the holding corridor, the other prisoners stared as she returned. No one spoke. Then Veluin bowed his head. The feathered one tapped its talon once. A sign of mourning. Or allegiance. Even the faceless one turned to follow her with its unseen gaze. And Kieran said the words that broke the silence. We don't need hope anymore. We have you. Isla said nothing. But she picked up her blade again. The Kavar didn't call it fear. They called it containment protocol escalation. Isla noticed the changes by the third match. Her quarters were no longer cells. They were bunkered compartments with angled walls and no corners, designed to deflect impact and prevent leverage. Drones perched in every corner, their red lenses tracking her breath, her steps, even her sleeping patterns. Her meals came through retractable slots. No utensils, no contact. No more guards walking within reach. No more prisoners assigned to her sparring rotations, either. They weren't keeping her isolated. They were insulating the system from her. After her third victory, against a hive-linked triplet of biosculpted combatants whose minds shared the same pain signal, the arena crowd didn't chant human. They chanted nothing. It was the silence of predators who saw another predator rising among them. Even Kieran noticed it. They're watching differently now, he whispered one night, voice low as they huddled near a flickering heat vent. Isla didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both heard the difference. In the obsidian throne chamber of the Conclave Citadel, Warlord General Threx stood before the high circle. His ceremonial sash had been cut short in one corner, a subtle, powerful signal within Kavar martial culture. It was a declaration of unresolved threat, of control unmaintained. Around him loomed the elders of the Dominion, a tapestry of ancient war flesh, bone grafts, and psychic leashes. Some were barely organic anymore. One pulsed through a nutrient vat like a god wrapped in old nerve tissue. Another had no head, just a translator stone hanging in the center of its chest. Threx spoke with the calm of someone staking everything. She cannot be broken. She cannot be owned. But she can still be used. One of the old ones shifted, resin bones cracking. She is a rally point for lower species. A symbol, it said. Symbols must be shattered. Or stolen. Another clicked a long, serpentine claw. Then make her perform. Let them see her crack. A third voice, younger, bitter, interjected. Or this will birth a legend that burns entire sectors. Threx paused a second too long. Then bowed. So he did. They built the arena for her. Custom terrain. Variable light. Shifting gravity plates. Randomized weapon drops. Drones set to lag a full second behind real time, to obscure tactical reads. No opening announcement. No stats. No theatrics. Just a gate. And from it emerged a new thing. It was taller than Isla. Thin as bone, but armored like myth. Its frame an alloyed lattice of Kavar splicing and Terran battlefield salvage. The plating was shaped like flayed muscle, matte black with crimson tracing along the nerve channels. Its limbs were reversed at the joint, digitigrade like a raptor, hands tipped in surgical razors that flexed too slowly to be organic. No mouth. Just a mask welded into the head plate, etched with a simple image. A human skull split down the center. The arena buzzed low. Not cheers. Not jeers. Just a low, instinctual murmur. Is it Kavar? Someone whispered in the data feeds. No, replied another. It's human. Or it used to be. Kieran had asked earlier, when Isla was being briefed by drone. What is it? The guards didn't answer. They only said, it was built for her. And it moved like it knew her. The fight didn't begin. It ignited. No pacing. No circle. No assessment. It lunged with bladed limbs and fractured precision, leading with a vertical strike meant to decapitate. Isla barely parried. Sparks lit the air. The second strike came instantly, angled, deceptive, designed not to kill but to expose a tendon. It moved like she'd once moved in a match against the Kateshi brute. Same feint, same tempo. Her armguard split. Blood fanned across the sand. She stumbled. It came again, slashing, pivoting, pushing her back with a ferocity devoid of showmanship. It wasn't performing. It was studying. The terrain didn't help. The floor shifted between solid ferrocrete and hex-woven mesh that sagged under her weight. Some areas had vertical jets that hissed flame at random intervals. Spike lattice columns rose like rib cages, making movement tight. A gauntlet made to kill improvisation. It didn't aim for center mass. It aimed for her pivots, her joints, her brainstem. It wanted data, calibration, and Isla saw it. She dodged, parried, slashed once, missed, pulled back, feinted left, struck low. A glancing blow caught its ankle. It adjusted too fast, the same way she had after Farah's final match. It remembered. The realization hit like a spike of ice. It wasn't just built for her. It was built from her. Her fight footage, her movement, her pain thresholds, her instincts. A clone? A mimic? An algorithm? No. Worse. A mirror. For a flicker, she saw herself. On that last day at Station Argent, blood smeared down her brow, Mason dying behind her. She heard Farah's voice, felt Kieran's small fingers gripping her forearm. You survive this, she told herself, or you become this. She forced it into the trenches of the arena, where the terrain shifted, pillars rising at odd intervals. She dove through a blast vent, forcing herself into close quarters. The thing followed without hesitation. They clashed. Again. Again. Blades screamed against each other. It sliced through her shoulder plating. She broke a rib with a hard side strike. Every move she made, it responded a little faster. Every hesitation, it learned. The drones above began flickering. Some feeds went black. Too fast for standard broadcast. Too uncontrolled. The noble circuits on the upper tiers started to shift, sponsors logging off, commanders issuing backup orders. Onboard AI translators began flagging Isla's neural profile as a tier-red anomalous risk. She could feel it tipping. She had to break the pattern. So she cheated. She threw sand. It reeled, not fully blind, but slowed. She slid under a rusted strut, dragged it free, and slammed it into its right leg. The structure cracked. It staggered. She didn't give it a breath. She slammed into its midsection, pinned it between two pylons, and drove her blade into its back. Once, twice, a third time. It screeched. Not a voice. Not pain. Friction. The sound of metal sobbing. And it collapsed. Isla fell to her knees beside it, breathing like fire, blood soaking through her tunic. She looked at it. Its mask twitched. A spark jumped. One of its hands moved, then fell still. She stood, turned to the arena, raised her fist, then bared her teeth. A human smile. Predatory. Daring. I've seen your monsters, she said, voice cracked but steady. Let me show you ours. The arena held its breath. Then the drones refocused. And across the Dominion, the chant began again. But this time, it wasn't human. It was her name. Isla. 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 Far across the stars, a slave world erupted into screams. In the command decks of frontier warships, analysts turned off their feeds. Threx stared at the footage with clenched fists, unmoving. And Kieran, behind the gate, whispered, "You're not just one of us anymore. You're all of us." The Dominion had tried to tame a myth. Instead, they'd made a goddamned legend. It started with whispers in the womb. They weren't words at first, just breath held longer, glances shared between cages, muscles coiled instead of slack. The guards didn't notice. Or maybe they did and thought it beneath concern. But something was changing beneath the crucible. Isla had become more than an anomaly. She was a fracture in the pattern. And fractures spread. It happened in small gestures. Veluin, the Cythery, began drawing unfamiliar constellations on the cell wall again. But this time they weren't stars. They were names. The feathered one, a Thrixan called Ire, began sharpening its talons each morning without looking away from Isla. Even the faceless one, whose grapples patterns had always been erratic, began mirroring Isla's footsteps from 3 cells away. Kieran kept his voice low, but his eyes never stopped watching. He memorized guard rotations, weapon cache drops, the colors of status lights when drone feeds blinked off for recharge. And in the silence between routines, the prisoners began to breathe together. Not in rebellion. Not yet. But in readiness. Threx sat in the private communion chamber of the Citadel's core spire, watching Isla's most recent match on loop. Not the kill. The moments before. The way she bled. The way she smiled. The way the audience, trained for obedience and hierarchy, had chanted a name instead of a species. He'd seen that chant before. Long ago. On the blood hollows of Lareth Prime, when the Sarek insurgents had refused to die quietly. It had started the same way. One face, one name, one act of defiance that ruptured the fear grid. He opened a secure channel to the Kavar Inquisition Corps. I want a list of everyone she's made eye contact with in the last 10 cycles. Anyone who's nodded, spoken, breathed too close. The voice on the other end responded calmly. Begin purges? Threx paused. Not yet. Let them believe she's rising. He closed the line, turned off the feed, and exhaled through clenched teeth. She's not a god, he said aloud. She's a fuse. He looked to the ceremonial wall where relics of old rebellions were preserved in stasis glass. Teeth, tags, broken blades. He added a blank plaque beside them. Reserve this space, he told the guards. For her helmet. They brought Isla a new opponent the next morning. No introduction. No ceremony. Just a door sliding open, and a half-dead man thrown into her cell. He was human. A soldier. She could tell by the bearing, even through the wounds. Burn scars. Cauterized stumps where fingers used to be. His uniform was unrecognizable, scorched black and sealed at the collar, but the eyes were sharp. He looked up, blinked, then grinned through cracked lips. Isla Vance, he rasped. We thought you were a story. She didn't move. What's your name? Lieutenant Marco Reyes. 7th Terran Infantry. Was. She crouched beside him. You have a message? Yeah, he said. We've been waiting. All we needed was a match to light. He tapped his chest, slow. 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Then the door opened again, and the guards came for her. The arena was different. No fire columns. No atmospheric distortion. No environmental hazards. No audience tiers were open. Only drone lenses peered down from the sky like dead eyes. This wasn't a spectacle. This was a culling field. A funeral pyre waiting for ignition. She stepped onto the wide-open floor. It was polished stone, reflective, but stained in streaks that had never quite washed away, blood embedded like veins across a cold, beating heart. In the center stood a raised disc, ceremonial in shape, an altar for offerings, or executions. And across from her, lined against the walls, were prisoners. Armed prisoners. Not chained. Not drugged. Geared. Some held shock sabers. Others had grav hammers, scrap blades, fusion gauntlets. The kind of weaponry usually reserved for the highest tier games. The guards stood in a perimeter around the arena, eyes alert, grips tight, jawline stiff. One Kavar adjusted his helmet twice. Another kept glancing to the towers above, waiting for orders that hadn't come. This wasn't training. This was a test. Isla moved slowly, scanning faces. Kieran stood to her left, arms bare, holding a knife like it was an oath. Ire the Thrixan flexed one talon, lowering its crest like a battle flag. Even the faceless one was present, its anti-grav shell humming low. And from the far wall, a speaker crackled. Marco's voice. Broadcast from the pit wall. Say their names. Isla raised her head. Fair Ibequi. A dozen prisoners raised their weapons. Isla saw a memory, Farah's last smile before they were forced to fight, the way her hand had lingered on Isla's blade before falling. Mason Halley. A gravhammer roared to life. Mason, laughing in a snowstorm on Mars, a half-smoked cigarette frozen to his lip. Tegan Cross. A plasma blade ignited. Tegan, singing through the static of a burning comm line, refusing evac until every civilian was out. The guards began to shift. Something in their posture and edge of readiness. Reyes. Kieran. Veluan. The crucible erupted. Not a riot. A war. The first strike came from Ire, whose talon shredded a Kavar enforcer at the spine. Then the faceless one surged forward, its gravity field shorting 2 turrets, sending drones crashing to the floor like insects with torn wings. Marco threw off his own bindings in the control room and pulled a knife from his hip, hidden beneath a false scar stitched into his ribs. Kieran lunged next. He didn't scream. He just drove the blade upward into a guard's thigh and ripped it out sideways. And Isla? She didn't charge. She walked, one step at a time, past falling bodies, weapons clashing, plasma arcing over sand. She stepped over a twitching drone, picked up a curved blade, and turned toward the nearest officer, and began to spill their names in blood. Every name was a cut, every cut a memory. Farah, Mason, Tegan, Aru crushed under a collapsed medhab while pulling civilians from the rubble. Jinya, laughing over instant noodles and sketching battle plans with crayons. Rafi, screaming orders as his lifeboat spiraled toward enemy fire. Colonel Sato, who told Isla once, "They don't fear us for our strength. They fear what we awaken in others." She didn't scream them. She spoke them. Clear. Calm. Loud enough for the audio feeds to pick up every syllable. The guards began to fall back. But it was too late. The rebellion had gone live. Every prison cell in the Crucible opened from Marco's hack. Dozens poured out, scarred, feral, limping, ready. Not just humans. Not just soldiers. Vraxians. Tellurites. The few surviving Delcari. All of them moved toward the breach. The Kavar lines broke. One officer fled and was cut down by his own defense turret, reprogrammed mid-run. Another barked orders to drones that were no longer listening. And above them, across the feeds, across the stars, the chant changed again. Not human. Not even Isla. Now they chanted a word the Kavar had not heard in generations. Freedom. And this time, it wasn't a broadcast. It was a call to arms. In orbit over the moon colonies of Braxon 9, a slaver control ship exploded in fire as its crew turned on their commander. On a mining station in the Calrex Belt, a human technician rewired the entertainment feed and played Isla's last words on every screen. In the tunnels of a broken moon on the far edge of Dominion Reach, a child in shackles whispered a name to the dark. Isla. And the stars began to shift. The crucible burned. Flames licked skyward from shattered towers. Drone hulls lay cracked and twitching across the arena. Corpses in Kavar armor smoldered alongside shattered prisoner bodies. The blood didn't care who had worn the chains. Only that someone had broken them. Isla stood in the center of the arena's altar disc, panting. Blood ran down her forearm in two steady lines. The blade in her hand was chipped, its curve no longer perfect, but it had killed 13 Kavar in the last hour. Kieran stood to her left, face smeared in soot and blood, clutching a shock rifle scavenged from a guard. Veluin limped forward behind them, his claw still clenched from where he'd broken it, punching a drone core apart with bare hands. Ire stood overhead, perched on the collapsed edge of a tower, scanning the horizon with silver-plumed wings extended for balance. The faceless one floated silent as ever, its grav field humming a tone that seemed to resonate with the low-frequency chant rising from the pit. Above, the drone feed still rolled. Broadcast wasn't something the Dominion ever lost. Even in failure, even in death, they watched. For control. For containment. For calculation. And what they saw was ruin. Isla lifted her head and looked directly into the primary broadcast drone. She didn't speak. She simply held up the bloodied weapon, point down, and planted it into the arena floor. The altar disc split beneath her, memory stone reacting to her presence, cracks spidered outward in the shape of an open hand. Then she walked away. Behind her, the survivors followed. They didn't flee the crucible. They claimed it. The lower barracks became a medical center. Kavar stasis gel was repurposed by Delcari tech adepts to treat wounds. The Delcari built altar stations from fractured drone parts, humming with harmonic frequencies that dulled pain. Every cell block was converted, one into a triage station, one into an armory, another into a command post. Each door was etched with the names of the dead in a dozen tongues. Even the arena sand was repurposed, its memory stone layer turned into a scanning field to track movement, monitor heat signatures, and anticipate counter-assaults. Isla assigned a team to scrape blood from the altar disc and mix it with copper dust to paint warnings in Kavar runes. We remember. They were preparing for war. Because it would come. And soon. Hearing coordinated shift rotations and supply gathering. Ire and Veluin ran recon, mapping nearby tunnels, sabotaging drone clusters, and disabling auto-sentries. The Faceless One drifted silently through every corridor, recording troop formations and enemy feed lines. None could speak to it. But Isla noticed, wherever it went, things broke better. They had weapons, yes. But more importantly, they had belief. The belief that monsters could bleed. Above, in the Dominion War Council's core sphere, Threk stood before the gods of the Kavar. 10 warlords in shadowed thrones. A circle of firelight. The air itself buzzed with the pressure of dominance, an atmosphere calibrated to suffocate weakness. The walls were carved from meteor glass inscribed with the last screams of conquered systems, captured in sonic etch. Frex did not kneel. He reported the Crucible's loss with no flourish. No excuses. Only strategy. She has ignited something we did not calculate, he said. Not merely in prisoners. In systems. In the myth web. He gestured to a data sphere projected above them. Chance signals. Pirate rebroadcasts. Uprisings on 5 minor worlds. One Kavar stronghold lost to rebellion within 72 hours of Isla's uprising. On 2 colonies, Kavar troops were executed by their own auxiliaries. She is no longer a gladiator. She is a gravitational center. A silence followed. Then the war god spoke. A throne shaped like a dragon's ribcage glowed with internal light. The warlord seated within had no skin, just a lattice of exposed nerves, suspended in a nutrient shell. Irregularities must be purged. Begin planetary suppression across all infected systems. Use the Ash Protocol. Whispers passed through the circle. A shadowed warlord with silver-cracked bone plating leaned forward. The Ash Protocol hasn't been invoked in 200 cycles, they rasped. It sterilized Afiyuki 6. We haven't even repopulated the Dust Belt. Threx turned to him calmly. Fire does not erase stories. It sanctifies them. If we burn too many worlds, she becomes sacred. Then what do you propose? The war god asked. Threx stared into the fire. We don't kill her. A pause. We unmake her. That night, inside the Crucible's makeshift war room, Isla stood over a hollow table, watching patterns flicker across the surface. Red lines showed Dominion patrol routes. Blue glyphs marked sabotage gates. Amber pulses tracked rebellion hotpoints spreading outward from the Crucible like shockwaves. She wasn't alone. Kieran leaned beside her, exhausted but alert. His voice had deepened older, sharper. Veluin stitched a wound in his shoulder with a Kavar laser threader, never flinching. Ire crouched beside a railgun, stripping and cleaning its magnetic core while humming an off-world war chant that no one recognized. Marco Reyes stood behind Isla, arms crossed. His boots were soaked with blood, but his hands were steady. You started something bigger than a rebellion, he said. She didn't look at him. I didn't start it. I just gave it a name. Reyes nodded slowly. The name's not yours anymore. Isla smiled faintly. I know. Veluin's eye crest pulsed amber. Signal spike incoming. Too clean. Too fast. The holotable shifted. One of the red lines distorted, fracturing into knife-edged vectors. The faceless one moved toward the center of the chamber. It pulsed once. Then again. On the table, the data clarified. A new force. Coming fast. Not Kavar military. Worse. Warlord enforcers. No rank insignias. No unit codes. Just an icon burned into the signal. A tree made of bones, inverted. They were not here to fight. They were here to erase. The Ash Protocol spearhead. Entire libraries of resistance had been wiped by their presence alone. The last planet they were sent to, Furin Delta, no longer existed on Dominion star charts. Kieran's jaw clenched. They're coming. Isla looked around the room. At the fighters. The wounded. The engineers still wiring memory stone mines into the entrance corridors. She didn't hesitate. Good, she said. She picked up a rail blade from the wall and slammed the core into place. Let's give them a welcome they'll never forget. The first ash did not fall from the sky. It rose from the tunnels. Silken, black, and silent, like the breath of a dying god. The warlord enforcers moved without signal. No drums. No engines. Only a low hum, barely audible, that made the memory stone tremble and the blood in one's ears whisper of endings. Not a sound of war. A sound of extinction. They had no known rank. No known names. No face. Each wore the void skin of executioners. A living shroud engineered from reactive null matter, bonded to the spinal matrix of captured prisoners. It moved like it hated light. Their armor didn't reflect so much as absorb, shadows deepening wherever they passed. Their sigil, an inverted tree made of bones, had no translation. Even Kavar avoided speaking it aloud. Whispers told of entire systems vanishing beneath them. Furin Delta, Ishari Prime, New Eden, planets where the soil still didn't remember what cities had once stood. Ire saw them first, far below the Crucible's outer trenches, drifting between torchless corridors, 5 shadows tall and gliding over the floor like oil. He didn't screech. He didn't warn. He took flight. The warning came from his body as he slammed through the upper barricade, blood fontaining from a cauterized wound across his back. He crashed near the altar disc, rolling once, talons skittering across the stone. "They're here," he rasped. "And they're not coming to fight. They're coming to unmake." Isla didn't issue a battle order. She pulled every squad lead to the altar. The crucible's inner hall was red-lit, blood-warm. Screens flickered with static, half-booted feeds from outer defenses, each drone's eye blinking like it was already afraid. "All of you know what the enforcers are," she said. "But what you don't know is this. They're not here to kill us because we're dangerous. They're here to kill us because we matter." She looked to Kieran, Veluin, Ire, the Faceless One, and the wounded leaning on broken rifles. "They want the world to forget we were ever here." She pointed to the drone hovering behind them. "Don't let them." Then she turned away and walked into the dark. The crucible became a battlefield of teeth and memory. From the upper arena, fighting collapsed downward, first to the ritual halls, then into the tunnel veins where ash seeped through vents like a sentient fog. Memory stone mines detonated in pulses of colorless fire, sending radiation surges only visible in ultraviolet. Automated glyph snares activated at proximity, blinding, burning, freezing. Collapsed towers were braced to fall with coded shrieks. When the enforcers entered the kill zone, 3 towers came down, screaming like banshees. But it wasn't enough. The enforcers didn't bleed, didn't burn. The first to breach the gate walked through molten rebar, the air around its limbs folding space like wet silk. It didn't run. It moved through things, walls, barricades, even bodies. The Kavar had given them weapons beyond physics. Veluin tried to engage it directly. He never reached it. One flick of its hand, and Veluin was gone. Not dead, gone. Atomized. The air shimmered. His claw fell to the ground, still twitching. Kieran screamed. Ire launched himself at the thing with a cry that split the comms. And then the real battle began. They fought like memory. They fought as if being remembered was survival. Ire lost a wing but dragged an enforcer into a fire trap and pinned it with his own body as it detonated. The explosion didn't kill it, but it stopped it. For 7 seconds. Enough. The Faceless One collapsed a corridor on another. It did not kill it either. But the pause mattered. Isla moved between squads, her blade a blur, voice anchoring the chaos. The lines were fracturing, tunnels burning, glyphs collapsing. Hold the corridor. Channel them through Fire Line 2. Don't let them touch your mind. Because the enforcers didn't just kill. They emptied. One survivor fell to his knees, screaming, not from wounds, but because his memory was unraveling. He forgot where he was, then who he was, then his name, then why he had a face. Ash poured from his mouth. The Ash Protocol was not a weapon. It was a ritual. Drop pylons fell in coordinated strikes, sleek, silver rods that buried into the ground and unfolded into cleansing towers. From each one, gray ash poured. Not chemical, not natural, but conceptual. Memories of entire civilizations burned into particulate. Where the ash touched, names unraveled. Languages disappeared. Signs blurred. Ink flaked. Carvings vanished. People forgot what they were fighting for. Some dropped weapons. Others wept without knowing why. One Delcari priest slit his own throat before the ash could take his god's name. Ire wept openly, feathers falling out in clumps. Around the command post, some fighters prayed to gods they'd never met. Others shouted names into the dark like torchlight. One young human with a fractured jaw scratched names into her own arm with a shard of glass. Isla stood on the altar and screamed into the wind. Say their names. Farah, Mason, Veluin. Every word was defiance. Every syllable rewrote the sky. The survivors took it up, chanting, naming, screaming the dead into permanence. Rafi, Jinya, Sato, Hallie, Kieran, Cross, Reyes, Ibequi. And slowly, impossibly, they pushed the enforcers back, not because they were stronger, but because they refused to vanish. The ash thickened. Isla's armor cracked. Her blade burned in her hand, the hilt glowing from overuse. One eye had gone blind. She didn't stop. The Faceless One collapsed a psychic rift, pulling 3 enforcers into an inverse field. Its body disintegrated in the process. Ire dropped from the sky one final time, impaling an enforcer with the last rail bolt they had. Isla crawled to the fallen altar, gasping. Blood ran from her ears. And then the sky split again. Not in death. In silence. The enforcers froze. They had her surrounded. They did not strike. The air felt different, heavy, expectant. Isla rose slowly, blade dragging against stone. One of them turned its head. A faint shimmer passed across its death plate. Not anger, not calculation, recognition. Its limbs stopped pulsing. It took half a step forward, then hesitated. It knew her, and it paused. For the first time in recorded Dominion history, a warlord enforcer stopped moving. The drone feeds flared, then cut to black. Across the stars, the last thing billions saw was her face, scarred, bloodied, eyes burning, and the sound of her voice. We remember. It was not a victory, but it was not erasure. And in that space between ruin and legend, humanity endured. The crucible did not fall. It stopped. When the enforcers froze, the ash froze with them. In the air, midsway, suspended like grief. The sound of the crucible, screams, explosions, memory glyphs cracking, evaporated all at once. The only thing left was breath. And then they withdrew. No retreat. No words. No signals. They turned, walked, vanished into shadow, dissolving back into the tunnels they'd risen from. The cleansing towers shut themselves down, their cores folding inward like flowers made of bone. The ash stopped falling, but it didn't fade. It hung there, faint, present. A quiet fog of almost forgotten things. And in that suspended quiet, some swore they still heard names. The survivors didn't cheer. They didn't even speak. They stood. Some wept. Some vomited. Others just breathed, long and hollow. Eyes unfocused. Hands twitching. One soldier walked in a circle for nearly 30 minutes before sitting and weeping quietly, holding a tooth from someone he couldn't name. Isla could barely move. Her leg was broken. Her fingers locked around the hilt of a melted weapon. But her eyes stayed open. She had to witness it. All of it. Because someone had to remember. The crucible's survivors gathered beneath the ruined altar as the sky turned to copper gray above them. No signal. No interference. Just stillness. The memory stone in the walls no longer pulsed. It merely glowed, a dim, dull light that cast long shadows. They moved the dead with care, the wounded with reverence. Veluan was buried in the arena's sand, the memory stone laced with fragments of his shattered claw. Around the pit, Isla had the names of all Sithri casualties etched in burn scratch. Ire's broken feathers were laid in a shrine near the altar, arranged in a radial fan with the rail bolt at the center. A dozen Thrixan prisoners gathered around it and sang a morning call that shook the bones of the crucible's lower decks. The faceless one couldn't be buried, so they etched its pulse chimes into the foundation. Every vent now echoed with a low harmonic hum, its tone subtly reshaped to carry that signature pattern, a permanent resonance. They were named the Crucible, not in defiance. In memory. The new glyph had no direct Kavar translation. In Terran speech, it meant the place that will not forget. Kieran limped beside Isla, silent, carrying what was left of a child's drawing board, its etched name smeared by ash, but not gone. They sat at the altar where it all began, backs against fractured stone, legs aching, air metallic and hot. Around them, engineers rewired defensive nets. Medics administered morph saline drips to fighters too damaged to speak. Someone in the east corridor found old broadcast beacons and was trying to clean one for off-world signal. Do you think they'll come back? Kieran asked, voice brittle. She didn't answer right away. They don't fear weapons, she said. They don't fear death. She looked up at the sky. But I think they fear this. What? She looked at him. The silence. And what lives inside it. Kieran stared at her for a long time. Then down at the board. I still see her sometimes, he whispered. Farah. When I close my eyes. But her face keeps shifting. Like it's being pulled apart. Isla reached out and gently pressed her hand against his. Then say her name. Keep saying it. Kieran nodded slowly. Then set the slate down between them. Then we should fill it. Across the Dominion, silence spread. Command outposts went dark. Data feeds corrupted. Ships malfunctioned, not from attack, but from interruption. The enforcers had failed. And no one knew why. The Dominion's information network, the Singularity Lattice, rippled with fractured command strings. Inquisitor protocols tried to initiate planetary burn cycles but encountered anomalies, nodes corrupted by counterchant signals, embedded in the audio spectrum. Somewhere, in the low-frequency hum of the Crucible's final moments, something had seeded itself in the Dominion's blood. A name. A presence. A defiance too deep to erase. The chant began again. This time not in stadiums. Not in hidden channels. It began in the gaps. On broken walls. Carved into helmets. whispered into the ears of dying soldiers, etched into the sand with burnt bones. We remember. We remember. The myth of Isla Vance, survivor of the crucible, defier of the ash, killer of silence, became untraceable. It was broadcast without signal, spoken without sound, shared without data. It was not a person anymore. It was a presence. It was fear. Within the Kavar War Council's inner conclave, no one spoke for 3 hours. Threx stood still, silent, staring into a null screen that replayed the final feed. Isla, surrounded. The enforcers pausing. The audio flatlining into static. It is not possible, one warlord finally said. No, another hissed. It is worse. It is real. Has she breached Mythtier? She is the breach. Silence followed. And across 10,000 worlds, Kavar governors asked the same question. What do we do when the silence starts to speak back? Somewhere in deep orbit over the shattered moons of Vardek's reach, a Dominion scout vessel drifted through broken dark. Inside the control cabin, Subcommander Relid watched a signal spike flicker on the feed. Not a distress call. Not a broadcast. Just a pulse. Commander, do you hear that? His junior officer asked. The tone played again. One sound. Low. Measured. Then a second, shaped like a voice. Isla, it whispered. A third sound. A name. Not hers. Farah. Then Mason. And the ash on the hull began to move. It curled away from the glass. Like it recognized the ship and let it go. In the Dominion's high citadel of Shrivar Prime, where the sky was carved from hexstone and the air hummed with memory-leaching static, the Kavar elite met in disarray. They did not say Isla's name. They referred to her as the anomaly. She had stopped the enforcers. She had broken the Ash Protocol. She had survived what was built to erase. The problem was no longer tactical. It was existential. She was not a threat to be destroyed. She was a question the Empire could not answer. How do you kill what teaches others how to remember? The War Council chamber, once a sanctum of triumph, now throbbed with unease. Null glass walls trembled with overlapping ghost feeds, data logs looping Isla's final broadcast, recordings of chant clusters erupting across non-human colonies, whispers of statues being carved in her image by species the Kavar had never conquered. One warlord suggested quarantining all systems within 3 jumps of the Crucible. Another suggested silence. Threx, eyes bloodshot, offered only this. We taught them how to die. She taught them what to die for. And no one dared speak after that. On the reclaimed Crucible, now renamed Namara, the place that will not forget, the survivors did not rebuild. They rewrote. The arena's memory stone was converted into an organic archive. Every scream, name, and chant from the battle was captured in pulse code, woven into light bands that traced the walls like veins. Former slaves etched maps of their homeworlds from memory, turning walls into constellations of loss. Engineers modified Kavar harmonics to carry emotion in bursts. Encoded grief made shareable. Glyphwork walls once designed to record pain now told stories. The children of the survivors painted scenes from the uprising, not as violence, but as myth. Isla seen not as a warrior, but as a shadowlit guardian holding back oblivion. Even the ash had changed. It lingered in corners and vents, inert but whispering. Sometimes, when the wind passed through broken ducts, it carried voices not spoken aloud, memories reciting themselves. Kieran led a team that gathered it, studied it, and began training new rebels in how to hear through silence. The Dominion sent drones. They did not return. They sent signals. The Crucible's walls swallowed them. They sent threats. Isla replied with a list of names. Each time different. Each time older. Some were Kavar. The Empire had erased so many that they had forgotten even their own. Logistics routes collapsed as planetary nodes stopped responding. Entire command chains buckled under waves of missing context. Officers panicked not because they were attacked, but because they could no longer remember what had come before. Orders couldn't be trusted. Maps no longer matched. The Empire was forgetting itself. In the shadow of the Braxton fault line, where entire Kavar fleets had once trained in gravitational war, a colony declared independence. No fleets, no transmission, no vote, just 3 words painted across their moons. We remember Isla. Their gravity towers inverted, rendering Kavar engines inert within range. 2 warships vanished attempting entry. The third turned around and defected. Elsewhere, The SCIFI built a monastery from the hulls of destroyed Dominion carriers. Each meditation chamber played back the final moments of Crucible broadcasts on loop, slowed to half-speed. Monks recited Isla's final words before sleep and taught their young how to scream names into the dark. The Kelurite Star Weavers encoded her into navigation. One tone, played once, that aligned routes away from Dominion space and into systems where her name had taken root. No one asked permission. They didn't need to. The silence had become gospel. Isla stood once more in the center of the altar disk, now cracked with veins of copper and blood. She carried no weapon. She didn't need one, because around her stood not warriors, but storytellers. Engineers who encoded rebel chants into Dominion frequency. Medics who turned screams into healing songs. Children who traced the names of the dead into starlight with their fingers. Archivists who walked the tunnels repeating every lost name like a breathless prayer. This was not an army. This was a memory that refused to go quietly. And when the next war came, it would not be fought with guns. It would be fought with remembrance. And the Dominion had no weapon for that. One night, alone in a ruined corridor, Isla found the fragment of an old Kavar data slate. She powered it up. Then she typed one word, Farah, and beneath it, I remember. Then she closed the screen and walked away. In orbit over a forgotten mining colony, a Dominion propaganda ship attempted to broadcast its standard purge message. Mid-signal, the audio collapsed into silence. Then one word, Farah, then another, Mason, followed by hundreds more, names the Empire had buried. The crew fell silent. Some wept. One dropped to his knees and began whispering his own brother's name, long thought erased. The ship shut itself down. Its lights dimmed. The stars outside seemed to lean closer. Within Shrivar Prime, the War Council began expunging records of the Crucible. Files deleted. Names purged. Maps redrawn. But every deletion made the hole wider. Like a wound that refused to scab. Because you cannot delete a ghost made of truth. And Isla was no longer a person. She was a memory that bled. And on every world where the ash once fell, someone whispered a name. And the silence whispered back. It didn't roar. It didn't burn. It listened. It learned. It remembered. And the Empire forgot how to win.